Okay, guys, here we go. We're going to start up right now talking about the relationship between energy and development. Shouldn't surprise you when we take a look at this map right here, and I'll get to our outline here in just a second. But it shouldn't surprise you when you look at the map and you see places like North America, i.e., the United States, Canada. They tend to use more energy per capita or on average per person than the developing areas of the world, such as sub-Saharan Africa, for example. So it shouldn't surprise you when we talk about this and looking at our notes right now. When we mention about developed countries, I think it's important to talk about that next to developed countries, simply put down that they use a lot of energy in many different ways for many different reasons. So they use a lot of energy in many different ways for many different reasons. That's what we want you to get down for developed countries, okay? You're going to see that developing countries still have that high demand for energy. They're still starting to use energy. But when you talk about using energy for many different reasons in many different ways, that's what we really got to look at when we look at developed countries. So they use a lot of energy, you guys, again, for many different reasons in many different ways. That's kind of what the highlight of this whole section is going to be about. Now, developed countries, when I talk about using it in many different ways for many different reasons, we're talking about alternative energy sources. We're talking about fossil fuels. We'll talk about those things in a little bit. But for many different reasons, why they need energy, production of food. Okay, and remember we said developed countries produce more food than developing countries. Running factories, producing manufactured goods, keeping homes comfortable. That means central air in the summer and heat here in the winter. Transportation of people and products. Okay, there's a lot more mobility going on in developed countries in comparison to developing countries. So again, a lot of energy is being used, you guys, for many different reasons, in many different ways. Now, when we talk about energy being used, or just energy in general, we tend to talk about the energy being either renewable or non-renewable. When we talk about renewable resources or renewable energy, we're talking about resources or energy that is produced in nature at a faster rate than humans consume it. Okay, so this is a good thing. Talk about renewable resources. We're talking about resources that are produced in nature at a faster rate than they can be consumed by human beings, okay, or be used by humans. Non-renewable. These are your natural resources that are consumed by humans at a faster rate than they can produce themselves. So they're being consumed at a much faster rate than they can produce or reproduce themselves. A couple things we want to look at with, again, I went over that quickly because we talked about that in chapter 1, and I'm sure you've had that in other science and social studies classes over the years. Supply and demand, okay? You can't escape this. It's becoming inevitable that economics, it really is going to dominate the next 4 parts of our now remaining 4 chapters. Going to be a lot of economic theory, a lot of economic discussion, you guys. So we do want to understand. We talk about supply, we're talking about the amount produced, okay? So when we talk about supply, we're talking about the quantity that producers are willing to sell at various prices. When we start talking about OPEC and their control over oil and how much of that oil they're willing to sell at such and such a price, that's essentially what we're looking at with supply. Quantity that producers are willing to sell at various prices. Okay? So we're looking at it from the production or the owner side. The demand is on the purchaser or the consumer. And when we talk about demand, we're talking about the quantity of products that consumers are willing and able to buy. So the quantity that consumers are willing and able to buy at various prices within a given time period. We should probably say that as well, within a given time period. The quantity consumers are willing and able to buy at various prices within a given time period. So when we say willing and able, essentially what we're saying is I might be able to purchase something at a particular price, but I'm not willing to spend that much on it. So that's where willing comes in. Able means that I'm willing to go and get it. I'm willing to go purchase it. I'm just unable and I do not have enough money, for example, to get that product. So when we talk about demand, we're talking about the quantity that consumers are willing and able, in this case, to purchase or to acquire. Now, moving on with that, fossil fuels. Obviously, supply and demand is a major factor here with fossil fuels, economically speaking, and we'll touch on that in just a little bit. But let's rewind a little bit and make sure that you guys understand the importance of fossil fuels in the world. It's distributed across the world, not equally. Some areas of the world have more of these fossil fuels or a particular type of fossil fuel than others do, but the fossil fuels account for 5/6 of the world's energy. So if you take a look again at our map right here, and we're going to go back a page actually, and we talk about this. Here are your fossil fuels right here. In purple, you got, well, I'll indicate it right here. In purple is your coal at 27.9%. And again, talking about energy being consumed. Oil or petroleum really on the rise, especially since the 20th century, and I'll mention that in just a couple seconds. And then natural gas. And then we have our other category at below 17%. So these are the big three. You can kind of mention the big three of the energy, and they're all fossil fuels, and they account for 5/6 of the world's total energy consumed. When we talk about coal, it was the first major energy source to replace lumber or wood. Okay, so it was the first major energy source to replace lumber or wood. And that dates back to the 1800s. Okay, so it was the first major energy source to replace lumber during somewhere in the mid 1800s. Okay, coal is basically found in the mid latitudes today. So when we talk about coal, and again, kind of just referring to our world map, if we can, real quickly, take a look at 315. And I'll just point out your mid-latitude. So again, you got the United States right here, especially along that central eastern portion of the original colonies right there, or the Atlantic coast. China also is found in there, in that region right there, you guys. So when we talk about this right here, we're talking about the mid-latitudes. Interesting enough, and I don't think you need to write it down, but the mid-latitudes, this is where the majority of the world's coal is found today. Interesting enough is when the world began to break off, i.e. Pangea and all that good stuff that we talked about in 7th grade, it actually was in the tropical areas, okay, tropical latitude zones, but in the tropics. But it moved and it eventually settled into the mid-latitudes. I don't think you need to write that down, but just so you understand that to make coal, it actually needs to be in a tropical setting. And so when you look at central Atlantic coast and China, you don't always think tropical off the top of your head. But the reason why they're in the mid-latitudes today is because of again, basically the movement of the Earth's crust or the Earth's land. China produces over 50% of the world's coal. So the mid-latitudes is the main region where coal is produced. China is the country that produces the largest majority of the world's coal. The United States also produces quite a bit, but China's over 50%, so they're standing alone in our discussion right here. Talking about petroleum. Okay, a little out of order right here, but it's rapidly, and when we talk about petroleum, petroleum is rapidly on the rise, you guys, since the 20th century. Again, when we look at our graphic of the big three energy sources that were being used, again, take a look at how petroleum has really jumped to the forefront since the 20th century. And that's what we want you to put down. Petroleum is really an energy source or a fossil fuel that's really been on the rise, especially since the 20th century. Persian Gulf or Southwest Asia, we can say it either way, to be honest with you. I guess I was really going inside the region. Southwest Asia or the Persian Gulf is going to be the largest oil producing region. All right, so the Persian Gulf is going to be the largest oil producing region. And these three are a lot closer. Again, you could thank North Dakota for that with the United States. Saudi Arabia and Russia are the big three oil producing countries in the world. They really stand out from the rest of the pack in regards to petroleum based refinery or drilling and refinery of oil into or petroleum into oil, excuse me. Natural gas. We talk about this. It was originally, I think this needs to be mentioned. I'm not 100% sure, but it was originally considered a waste product. People didn't think much about natural gas. They just assumed it was something they had to go through in order to get the petroleum and they had to deal with. Medicine's changed, we know that. So what you want to put down for natural gas is originally considered a waste product of petroleum. But understand with natural gas, a lot of times you might be hearing your parents talking about the gas bill right now. They're maybe not just talking about your car gas bill. What they could be talking about is the heating of your home because so many homes are heated by natural gas today. So it's becoming a major, major important fossil fuel or non-renewable resource by itself. Global inequalities in distribution of fossil fuels. Okay. We know that there's inequality in regards to the distribution of fossil fuels. We do not see a perfect system in which fossil fuels are laid out evenly across the world. Okay. Some general statements to make, and I just kept them on here and just would like you to add them, and your book has them in dark red print as well, is the heaviest consumers of fossil fuels come from developed countries. We pointed that earlier with the map when we were talking about North America, or primarily the United States, Canada, use far more fossil fuels than Sub-Sahara does, for example. And also notice that some developing countries have an abundant resource of fossil fuels, or just have abundant resources, where others have little to none. So developing countries, you guys are kind of, the distribution matters because the success or the level of development, remember with developing countries, there's different levels. There's low developing, high developing, for example, and this will a lot of times help categorize if they're low developing, mid developing, or high developing based on how many resources that they have within their country. So it's an important thing to notice, and it is important to talk about with developing countries that some of them have a lot more resources than others do. Since 2007, trending since 2007, I feel like that's some sort of an ad for a commercial or something, but in regards to trending since 2007, on page 315, if you want to take a quick look at that. There's a line graph here that I want to show you. Okay, coming right down here, and look at this for future energy demand. Back in the day, it was no question that in regards to the demand of energy, people who are willing and able to purchase, again, oil, for example, at various prices within a given time period, the United States and other developed countries led the pack there. Now look at the trend and how it's switching, because again, when we talked about the demographic transition model, see all this stuff starting to come together slowly but surely. Not everybody's at the same period, and so many developing countries are at that industrial period right now. Whereas many developed countries are at that period where they're just trying to keep things constant and keep that growth at a constant level. You're starting to see major growth occur in the developing countries right now, not just in population, but in other aspects of life too, such as industrialization. So their need for more resources is on the rise there, you guys, and that's something that we wanted to point out right there. So that was that trend since 2007. If you're wondering what can I write there, just put down that developing countries demanding more and more fossil fuels each and every year. So developing, now don't put down develop, but developing countries are again demanding more and more fossil fuels or just simply energy resources each and every year, and it's been going that way since 2007 strong. Energy reserve. Okay, so we're talking about the use of all this energy, okay? Well, how much is left, or how much do we know that's left? And that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about energy reserves. Here's where we're analyzing and understanding the amount of fossil fuels that are left to be used. So basically, anytime we talk about energy reserves, we're analyzing, or we're trying to find an understanding of the amount of fossil fuels, in this case, that is left to be used in the world. Okay, and we basically can categorize that analysis or that understanding of trying to predict how much fossil fuels are left. We put them into two categories. We have proven reserves, and then we have potential reserves. Proven reserves are the actual supply of fossil fuel energy remaining from known deposit sites. Okay, so again, actual supply of fossil fuels that we have from known deposit sites. So it's the actual supply of fossil fuels that we have from known deposit sites. So we know where this is at. We have a good idea of how much is in there. And so that's what we're able to say with proven reserves. Well, how much we have left from known sites that we're acquiring the various big three from. In regards to coal, when we look at proven reserves and we begin trying to figure out how much we have left, you guys, based on the areas that we are acquiring coal from, essentially that they say, and they'll give you some numbers as well, the world reserves stand at 1 quadrillion metric tons. You can add that to your key issues packet. All you need to put in your notes right here for proven reserves is there's basically the coal, and we know where we're getting it from today. There's about 131 years left. If we're using it at the same rate that we are now, and then we also look at where we're getting it from. Essentially, what they're trying to tell you is, well, on average, we have about 131 years left of coal deposits within our proven reserves. Natural gas, and you're going to see these numbers are going to decrease each time, 49 years. Essentially, okay, so they talk about 175 trillion cubic meters. In the world of math, and again, I'm not a great mathematician by any means, that doesn't really add up, no pun intended there. So when I talk about natural gas, I just want you to put down that there's about, based on what we know we have and where we're getting it from, there's about 49 years left, give or take, okay, on estimation. When we talk about this, Southwest Asia, I think it's important to mention that petroleum because, again, that over-reliance, especially here in the United States, on petroleum-based products. Southwest Asia, Central Asia, they have the most left. That's what you want to put down, okay? So we're looking at that. United States is still trying to hold on to its reserves, but as far as having a site that we know that we can tap from, again, North Dakota really helped the United States out for a period of time here and still has, I guess I should say. But Southwest Asia and Central Asia, these are the two leading regions that have the most, have the largest proven reserves left. So the two largest regions, with the largest amount of proven reserves left. All right, so that's what we can put there. Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Canada, they basically have 40% of the total proven oil reserves out there. So they have 40% of the total oil proven reserves out there where we know exactly where this oil is and how much we can estimate that based on the consumption we're using now and how much is left in that particular area based on a geology and other scientific study. You guys, they're basically all the proven oil reserves that we have left in the world is in the hands of, or will be in the hands of, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Canada. OPEC, something we need to talk about when we talk about oil reserves. I think most of you have heard of Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. You don't need to write that down. Everybody just calls it OPEC. On page 320, they talk about this in greater detail. I guess I can just give you the definition first, though. OPEC, this is an oil cartel, okay? That's an oil cartel that was formed to gain more control over their resource, okay, over their resources. So again, in this case, it's going to be petroleum, in some cases natural gas. Okay, so it's an oil cartel. That's the big two words you want to put in there. Formed to gain control, or to gain more control over their particular resource, in this case, petroleum. So that's what we're looking at with OPEC, okay? So essentially what I'm trying to tell you, if you didn't, if my definition wasn't good enough for you, just put down they have a lot of control over the establishment of oil prices throughout the world. They really, really directly and significantly affect oil prices throughout the world. That's what I really want you to know about OPEC, with their direct and significant control and impact that they have on oil prices throughout the world. Interesting thing you want to write down, Iran and Russia, these are one of two countries to have over 10% of the control of the remaining big three fossil fuels. So if I was going to show you a graphic right here, and I'll try to find that graphic for you. And here is this graphic right here, you guys. Oops, sorry about that. All right, and Russia are one of two countries to have 10% or more in these three big fossil fuel categories. So this is a pretty important page right here at 318. And I think it's important because of current events and what's going on in the news. You guys are familiar with Russia. We used to have a Cold War, a lot of tension between the United States and the former Soviet Union. That tension has come back to some degree, not to the intensity of the Cold War that we've talked about before in class, but there is tension between these two major superpower countries. Taking a look at it, when you look at coal, of our talking about proven reserves left, where we know where there's actually large amounts of coal and how much we have, we can analyze and understand how much we essentially have left. Keep moving that. Sorry about that. Russia, right here, has 18% of the proven reserves left. So we're looking at that. So that's well over 10%. Then, God, I keep doing that. Sorry. Then Russia also, look at this number right here for natural gas, almost 27% of the proven reserve left for natural gas. So Russia's going to be a major player. I think it's significant and necessary to note because of the fact that Russia is a significant player, but at the same time, we don't have, our relationship's a little bit cool, no pun intended again, sorry for all these terrible puns, due to the Cold War. We don't have the best relationship with them. We have to be concerned because they have two major fossil fuels, two major energy sources, non-renewable energy sources that are in use in the world today. Another one, which we know because there's lots of talk over the Iran deal, and again, I know a lot of you like to talk politics. That's not our job as human geographers right now. We just got to point out the stats, and then hopefully we can make good solutions or alternatives, I usually call it, because there's no perfect solution to the issue right here. Iran has almost 16% of the proven reserve of natural gas left. And in regards to petroleum, they're over 10% of the proven reserve there as well. So here are two major countries that are relationships as of late and basically long-standing in history haven't been the best, but are still two pretty important countries, and they're going to continue to be important because of the large amount of fossil fuels that they still have within their own proven reserves. Potential reserves, last thing we'll talk about in part one of the Key Issue 3 podcast right here. We talk about reserves. We're talking about the supply of fossil fuel deposits that are thought to exist, but not yet proven or discovered. All right, so that's basically supply of fossil fuel deposits that are thought to exist, but not yet uncovered. Let's say it that way instead, but not yet uncovered. So they're believed to exist, or we know they exist. We just can't get our hands on them, and we'll talk about the different types of potential reserves. Basically, what we're looking at right here, once they're discovered or we're able to acquire the resources, then they move from potential reserves to proven reserves. So once that discovery or that ability to acquire these resources, to mine these resources takes place, then they move to the proven reserve category. So next to discovery, this leads to a reclassification, you could say, to the proven reserves category. So next to discovery, once its discovery takes place or ability to acquire, then what happens, you guys, is it moves or it's reclassified to the proven reserves category. Basically, three things we want you to note about the discovery or about potential reserves. There are still some undiscovered fields of fossil fuels out there, for example. They're newer, probably smaller, and more remote as well. So that's one thing you want to put next down there, undiscovered fields. New fossil fuel sources exist, but more than likely they're going to be smaller, and they're going to be more remote, or they're going to be more difficult to just acquire or to gain access to. North Dakota was a very, very pleasant surprise for our nation's economy. And I know that people talk about socioculturally, what has it done? Society-wise, what has it done? In regards to urbanization and urban sprawl, all those things people want to talk about. But one thing we do know is North Dakota was a very unique situation because it wasn't a small amount of oil. It was a rather significant amount of oil that was discovered here, adding to the United States' proven reserves once it was discovered and uncovered. Enhanced recovery, further amounts of fossil fuels discovered in used up areas. Okay, so we talk about enhanced recovery. Essentially, we're going to fossil fuel sites that we thought was just about out, but recently rediscovered new amounts. Okay, so new amounts were uncovered or rediscovered. Unconventional sources, simply put down that fossil fuels exist, but the fossil fuels exist here, but it's very difficult or expensive to extract it. All right, very difficult or expensive to extract it. A couple of examples you can put down, I'll actually type them in and then we'll be done for the day, would be Canadian oil you can put down, as I can't type right here. So Canadian oil would be one. The Canadian oil sands, where essentially they're finding this gunky, gooey type of petroleum-based substance there, you guys, within the sands. Used to be very expensive and inefficient and cumbersome to acquire it. They're getting better at it, especially in Alberta. They're getting a lot better at it. Fracking is something else that has been discussed in the news, and again, a lot of political issues coming up because should we do it, should we not do it? Fracking is when you use high-pressured water. Basically, it's a form of strip mining using high-pressured water. So it allows you to just use this intense water pressure to clear away the land a little bit to see if you can uncover more resources. Not the most environmentally conscious type of thing to do. Okay, so there is basically talking about our nutshell version, talking about the relationship between energy and development, you guys, and where do we go from there. Part 2 is alternative resources. That'll be another podcast coming up soon after this one. Thank you for your time, and I hope you guys have a great night.